Yes, thanks, Ajay. Sorry, coming. In the meantime, if anyone has any questions for Ajay, please write it in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ajay. That's, I think, really nice way to get us started to talking about MNE in terms of the context of community conservation and not forgetting about that, because I think all of this course, we want to bring it back to that and not get stuck too much in just terminologies and terms, but think where does the work we do fit in community conservation? So please feel free to write questions for Ajay or Juliet in the chat as we talk now, but this section now we are going to take a little bit of a step back and come back to monitoring and an evaluation and look at some of the key concepts and the importance of clarifying our goals in community conservation and how to reach these goals through a theory of change. So in all of this, again, we're going to be weaving it with community conservation. So first, to start, and to try to make it not too boring, as some of you expressed early on, we're going to start with some fun definitions. So I would love if we can work on it together, actually, to just reflect on how one defines monitoring and evaluation, or sometimes we call it M&E. That's often a term we call it monitoring and evaluation. So I would like to ask everyone here, what is monitoring and what is evaluation? And how is monitoring and evaluation different? And I want you to think about it in terms of the different stages of the project cycle. So our project has many different cycles, from action, reflection, learning to planning. So where you think, for example, if monitoring is located in this project cycle, or where you think evaluation is located, and to also think about the context of community conservation. So when you do this, and there's no right or wrong answer, it's just a moment for us to reflect on your experiences, maybe the challenges you face and the lesson learned, and just the way you currently see monitoring and evaluation. So I'm going to actually unshare my screen. And Ajay, actually, I think I can share the Mentimeter. So we're going to, I put it again into Mentimeter, but it's slightly different. So I'm going to put it in the chat again. And you can see here, you can click on the first link and write your answers. And then we're going to see the responses. So we're just going to come up with the definition together. And this is just to make sure we're on the same page, because otherwise we're moving forward on different roads here. So let me open the results to see if it's coming up. And I'll share the results with everyone. Yes. So we see some results have already come in. Tracking progress, reaching goals. Are the links working for everyone? First of all, maybe I should ask. Oh, yeah, they are. Monitoring is ongoing. Okay. Keeping track of important indicators and hope that we can adapt and work out what is relevant. There's another is assessing effectiveness. Monitoring is just to see what has been done by the project proponents. Great. Tracking along the way, monitoring. Yeah, it's great if you can let us know which one you think is monitoring, what's evaluation. Monitoring how the project is going on, evaluation, results and outcomes. Measuring what we're doing and how we're doing and adapting. Great. Monitoring continuing process, evaluation towards the start and the end of the project. Monitoring is long-term systematic process of collecting data. Evaluation is assessing the past and current efforts. Great. So I'm seeing that the group is seeing a difference between the two, which is super and something that's important to clarify early on. Evaluation analyzes results and trends, such as monitoring at certain intervals. Evaluation is to see how well the outcomes or results match the objectives. evaluation, assessing and analyzing how we are doing towards tweaks based on evaluation. Super. So I see, yeah, a lot of great responses. And I think many of you should be leading the course because you obviously have great definitions out there. Monitoring is in action stage. Okay, so if there are any final definitions that want to come in, or Juliet, or Ajay, if you have any comments you want to add?
No, looks great. Really nice insights.
Great. Okay, so then I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to again share my, so we can go over monitoring and evaluation together. But what we can see is that many of you have really a strong understanding of what monitoring and evaluation, which is a great start. So we can move along and build on that. And it's always, however, even if you guys do have a strong understanding, it's always nice to remind ourselves of the difference between these two processes, because they involve different tools, they involve different questions. So just as a reminder, and to put together what everyone has said in the Mentimeter, just a reminder that monitoring is more of the routine collection and analysis of program data or program activities. So this can be ongoing, whether it's weekly, monthly, annually. And the questions that monitoring often tries to answer is, are we doing the work we planned? Are we working towards our objectives? And as Ajay explained during his example, it can really help us alert of any early problems that come in with our program, and we can review our program data and then adapt, as some of you also shared in the Mentimeter. While evaluation is more about answering specific questions about our performance, and is more of an in-depth analysis that tells us whether we can continue or should actually completely change our program. So evaluation is more about how effective is our program in reaching our goals. And it's really, according to the World Bank, they really say it's about assessing whether our project is reaching its intended objectives. So sometimes, as some of you clarified in the Mentimeter, monitoring can lead to evaluation. So they're not completely separate, as shared in this this image here, but they do, however, involve often different tools and methods, and especially regard to community conservation. So that's why it's really nice to remind ourselves of the different distinguishes between them. And always to go back to that. So now, just as a reminder, both for monitoring and evaluation, it always starts with questions, because we're trying to answer questions about our programs. And it's good to step back and clarify what these questions could be, because that's where we're going to start whenever we develop a monitoring and evaluation assessment, or if we want to answer, about where we're going and track progress. So to just go over some of these questions here, I've summarized in the slide some key questions related to monitoring. And monitoring can really help us answer these questions that really look more towards implementation. So that's the way I often think about it, is monitoring is more related to implementation and assessing performance. So here are some key questions that it's not limited to these questions, but just to help you think about what kind of questions you might try to develop for your monitoring program. While evaluation is more related to effectiveness of your program and how you're reaching your intended objectives or goals. So here are another set of questions. For example, changes in behavior or conservation outcomes in the community group. To what extent the observed changes in the group or the program is related to your program and not to wider forces. Maybe the goal is related to reducing a threat towards the snow leopard, and your program is directly doing that. So that might be another evaluation question. So I hope that provided some clarity between the two, but just for fun, we're gonna take it a little bit further, and we're gonna ask ourselves and test ourselves on the spot. But don't worry, the answers will not be shared between us, but we're gonna launch a poll, and I just launched it. And I want to have everyone here just ask yourself, is the following monitoring or evaluation? So researchers conduct a study to determine if livestock insurance program is resulting in less incidences of retaliatory killing. So the results are coming in. Yeah, it's a poll with Zoom, so you'll see hopefully something coming up on your screen and you can respond. Okay, so almost all of the results have come in, and I'm seeing, yeah, I think there's a lot of clarity in the group. So I'm just going to end the poll and show you the results. So you should see your results now, which is related, I think 100% of you said it's evaluation, which is yeah, in this case, I mean, it would depend on context, of course, but in this case, they're really assessing the goal of the project was to reduce retaliatory killing, so it was working towards that. Okay, great. So now here's another one. So I'm going to relaunch the poll and ask you to ask again, what about this question? A district manager reports on how many women are trained as livestock vaccination ecosystem health workers. So the answers are coming in. I'm glad that there's a lot of clarity. It seems to be, but because I often get a little bit confused by these two, so this is helpful. Okay, great. So we've almost got all of the responses coming in. And again, 100% said it was monitoring, which is great. So now we're going to look at questions, because I think when we phrase it as questions, it can be a little bit more challenging understanding whether it is evaluation or monitoring. So I would like us to again ask, is this question monitoring or evaluation? Was the program successful in increasing the area of protected prey habitat? Super. So think about, and it might help to think about, okay, what is your evaluation question in this sense? And maybe this is, for example, a prey ungulate reserve, and the goal is to reduce livestock grazing in certain areas of this pasture area and to increase more grazing for ungulates. Okay, ending the poll, and most of you said it was evaluation. And I think, yeah, if the program is really, that's the goal, it's evaluation. Two of you said it's monitoring, and that does make sense. Maybe this is part of a bigger program and this is a step towards that goal. So of course it depends on what program is in place. So in some cases, this question could have been monitoring or evaluation. Here I was aiming for evaluation. Okay, just a few more. How many skill building training workshops took place in the village during the year? So we're going to relaunch it. It's just the last two. Please feel free to vote. How many skill building training workshops took place in the village during the year? Super, so the votes came in really quickly. I'm going to end the poll, and most of you said it was monitoring, and I agree with you on that one because it's an annual contribution to assessing skill building and trainings for this program. So what about Ajay's experience? And Ajay's example related to the Corpus Fund, which helped them adapt the program. How would you consider that was related to monitoring or evaluation? So I think they were recording how much funding was coming in from the organization, how much funding was coming in from herders, and they were able to then see how much money was left related for the insurance program. And Ajay, I don't know if you want to comment on this this example.
Yeah, I mean, I can see most votes have come in, but the way we may have seen it when the program started off was probably more as a just a aspect of the program to monitor. So we might have seen it as an exercise in monitoring.
Great. Okay, and most of you are saying it's monitoring. So super. Okay, so I think that these are great examples we have. So essentially, thank you, everyone. So I'm glad that we're clear about those distinguishes. But if you do ever have questions about how to distinguish them, please do feel free to share in the chat and discuss, because it's not always black and white. There are some gray, and it really depends on the program itself, whether it is monitoring or evaluation. But there's a lot of good reasons why we conduct monitoring and evaluation. While it is time consuming, as many of you said, and might be a burden, and it requires staff, it requires a lot of funding. Sometimes we don't have the funding to do it. There can be a lot of benefits, and which in some cases outweigh the costs. So we just wanted to go over quickly some of these benefits, and some of them relate to accountability. So I'm not sure, but often people say they do monitoring and evaluation because their donors ask them to, because the grant says we need you to monitor these indicators and if we reach these targets. So often as NGOs, as for community conservation, that's maybe why we might monitor our programs or might evaluate. The problem with it being related to accountability often is donors are only supporting us for a short time. So it might be really hard to monitor for that short time, or it might be really hard to actually carry out an intensive evaluation of our program over that short time. However, it can, M&E can really help with accountability among our project staff, and determining if resources are being extended in a manner as planned or according to the budget, and just demonstrating impact or success of our project for our donors, for our partners. But it can also be about learning and allowing feedback about our program and progressing and making sure that we're really on track. So improving effectiveness of our programs and allowing mid-course corrections. So we can really make sound decisions, not only for this program, but perhaps other programs in the region based on learning and reflection from learning from the program. But as we talk about today, we also want to think about participatory methods, and participatory methods might have wider goals. So when we think about participatory methods, we're talking about when stakeholders, for example, local people, community members, are actually active participants in M&E, and they're not just sources of information. They're involved in the activities, perhaps from the planning stage, perhaps from the data collection stage, the analysis, or the reflections, depending on the context. They might be involved at different stages of the project cycle. And these participatory methods, as Ajay shared already, can really empower local people to initiate and control and take action themselves on their program. It can also help community members define their own indicators of success, so that we're not saying, okay, what is success for the program? They can really help define it in their context. And it also allows for immediate sharing of the results with the community. So it's less about us going back, analyzing the result and then sharing, but this more collaborative process. So as we work through M&E, we just have to remind ourselves that it's often a tightrope between these different kind of benefits, and it's really hard to do maybe everything all in one go. And what we might aim to do will depend on the context, depend on our program, and also depend on the questions that we ask. So before we move on to the next section, I wonder if anyone has any questions, or if there are any questions in the chat related to this first introduction to M&E before we talk about complexity. Okay, so I see there are no questions in the chat, but please feel free, and Juliet and Ajay can answer. So we're going to quickly talk about the context within M&E before we do an activity. So we clarified what monitoring and evaluation is or could be, but we know that in terms of community conservation, especially, when we're looking at change in our goals, we're dealing with a lot of complexity and also a lot of complex. So in the second section, we're going to discuss a little bit about the process of change and how it's really complex, and it's even maybe even harder to measure it, to deal with this complexity. And the importance of recognizing context in the case of our community conservation groups and the surrounding setting. So wouldn't it be nice if we could predict our efforts and activities that could lead to specific impact in this way? So this is our classic M&E representation. It can be represented very linearly, looking at over time, we do these set of activities which lead to certain outputs and outcomes, and then voila, to the impact of our goal. And this is an example, for example, of a results-based framework. And we tend to actually plan our M&Es in this kind of linear format. However, in real life, we are faced with the situation more like this, of uncertainty. There's going to be unintended as well as intended results. And there's clearly, I mean, sometimes there are different starting points. It doesn't necessarily start always at the beginning of our program. And outputs can take really different forms. Outcomes can be predictable, but sometimes they can be really unpredictable. And our activities can lead to different outputs, outcomes that vary in time and aren't even expected. So essentially, it can be completely random. So we have to recognize this, and we have to recognize that we're not the only organization or NGO or the only research group or government department working in this context. We're not working in a vacuum. There are other government policies, there are wider economic forces, there are wider environmental policies in place, social issues that are going to influence our programs. So essentially, whether we achieve our goals and our impact is really about the context, about how our programs fit within this bigger picture. So here, this tries to look at it in a different way and see that change is really unpredictable and very dynamic. So this slide really exaggerates this and tries to capture how there are many different influences that we need to understand and in some cases even track to see how we reach our goals and our outcomes. And I just also want to highlight that different people might have different perspectives on what's happening. And we might only see some of the picture. So we might only be working, for example, with the capacity building of the government, for example, and only see part of this central picture of the complexity. And that will influence whether we think we're influencing our program or not. But so it's important to try to triangulate information and basically recognize that maybe there's no one truth, that there are many truths. And as individuals, we often understand this. We understand that our program is not in a vacuum, but in the M&E methods, we often are blind to this. So it's important to recognize this when you develop your M&E methods and always go back to this in the context of these wider forces and settings taking place. So the serious message here, and I'm not trying to discourage you totally and make you think M&E is impossible, but I just want us to recognize that we might only have partial information. So there might only be part of the information that we can control, which is this green circle here, and that we are contributing to through our program. And there is other areas that we might influence through our program, but we actually don't have control. And we might need different strategies to influence this part of the setting. And there might be a third part of the setting that we have no control and no influence at all. And just recognizing this, that we can't control everything in the setting, especially with just conservation program. And this is where maybe multiple programs in one setting might lead to a bigger impact and might be easier to measure impact. But just recognizing this, but please do not be discouraged. There are tools to deal with this kind of complexity that we're going to talk about. And another important aspect about community-based conservation is its long-term. And change to reach our goals doesn't happen tomorrow. It might not even happen in 1 year. For example, in the snow leopard world, we are often trying to protect really large geographical areas by involving communities and people. And this might mean many communities. It might mean many stakeholders, many administrative units. It might be about changing social norms, which takes time, and it won't happen necessarily in 1 year. So I think it's important to recognize that, and sometimes recognizing that we can only measure progress towards our objectives and not expect the change to have already happened. And just that these processes take time. So M&E has little added value without a clear understanding about what we want to achieve. And for example, these may be goals of our programs or the change we're looking for in this landscape, but with using multiple programs to influence. So it's important before even starting M&E is to be really clear about our long-term goal and to really zero in on that goal. Otherwise, it's hard to measure progress towards reaching that goal, especially in terms of evaluation and looking at whether we're reaching the results we intend to reach. So as a first activity, I'm going to pass it on to Juliette, and we're going to try to help frame ourselves in our M&E work before going ahead and thinking about monitoring our programs. So over to you, Juliette.
Thanks, Justine. Okay, so we're going to have a quick activity in breakout groups. And what we're going to do...
Juliette, I'm sorry. Before we go on, there's one question that I have, which has come from Uzma. She's mentioned it in the chat, and maybe either of you can take that. She asks, who's responsible for the whole M&E in the project as a main person? So that's a question she has. Who owns the whole thing? Because like Justine, you said, it can be complicated and can have a lot of people working on it. So, and Uzma, if you want to clarify on that or add to that, please feel free to unmute and just build on that question if you wish to.
Juliette, go ahead. Maybe you can answer.
I was thinking maybe you could answer, Justine.
So I think, Uzma, I think it's very much, and I'm sorry, it doesn't maybe really answer your question, but it's about context and the organization you're working in. Some organizations might actually have an M&E department and have many staff that dedicate their full-time job to doing this with the programs. And other ways, as we're going to talk about, it might be the actual community members that might be involved with the monitoring with support of NGO staff, for example. So there are many different ways you can do it. And I think it really depends on the goal of your M&E program. Is it about learning? If it's about learning, then you might not want the M&E staff to be in an office far away with very little interactions with your team or the communities on the ground. If it's about participatory methods, you might want it to focus more on the community. So yeah, I think it depends on resources, as we said, because it takes a lot of time and effort, on capacity. And I think that's something we're going to talk about later. As you know, participatory methods focus on getting the community involved at all stages of the program cycle, but that might not be realistic in the context you work because of capacities or the context itself. So I think it really depends. So yeah, over to, if you want to add anything, Juliette.
No, just to add that in all of those different scenarios of who may be the person responsible for it, or the group of people responsible for it, the key thing is transparency and and sort of openness. So just sort of communicating you know, who is responsible for what, how things might change, etc., and so that everyone knows what's happening in terms of monitoring and evaluation. Because one of the worst sort of situations you can get into is sort of assuming that a particular group or a particular person are, you know, the ones in charge of M&E, and actually they're not, and then you can have a whole program that sort of falls apart because there isn't, you know, there isn't a proper understanding or transparency around how M&E is actually managed. So as Justine says, you know, it really depends, and also it can evolve. So you might be in a situation where initially the monitoring and evaluation is led, if you like, by an external organization, but then as the sort of community participation in M&E develops, they might then, you know, feel confident enough to actually take that role on. So it's not, you know, it can evolve, but throughout that evolution, obviously it's important to communicate and to, you know, to sort of clarify the roles at every stage. So Uzma then says, so one might say it's a teamwork to have the results or overall impact in hand at the end of the day. Yes, so it's true that in a community-based conservation M&E perspective, it could indeed be a teamwork. But again, you know, really knowing who in the team does what, when, how, etc., how it's all then sort of looked at, analyzed, etc. So just it's a clarification and transparency around how that's managed. Super. I can't see any other questions that have come in, Ajay. So,
no, that was the one. Becky did ask a specific question to my presentation, which I had responded on the chat. So Becky, I hope that's fine, but we can always speak about that.
Becky, was that all right?
Yeah, it's quite a complicated and detailed question.
So I can say that, you know, when we started off the program, the kind of indicators we were hoping to probably have was that there were as many people participating, and there was as much livestock seen by the villagers to be covered under the program, and those were our kind of indicators. So in the initial years, you know, there was some resistance among people to participate in the new program because they were hoping that, or they just wanted to see how it ran and so on. So I think the initial years were the focus of the program was of that sort. But as the community got involved in the program, and so for example, you know, they typically would have the highest premium for the biggest animal, like an adult yak, but they soon realized that the risk of an adult yak getting killed by a snow leopard was very, very low. And so over time, what happened was they started making these tweaks to the program where they started identifying where the greatest level of risk was, and then adapting the program to that. And then towards going in favor of, you know, they had this competition among herders of which herder was the most efficient one, or the least amount of livestock was killed when that herder was going to herd. And so, and all of that was being supported or funded partly by that corpus which the insurance program was set up with. So so those indicators have moved a little bit over time, from initially just looking at pure coverage and those kind of almost like process indicators towards indicators which are also trying to see if the risk can be minimized or the impact can be minimized of negative interaction.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting how the indicators might change according to your understanding and the context changing as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Super. Okay, so in this activity, which we're going to take 15 minutes for, what we would like to focus on is thinking about the change that we want to see from our program. So it's sort of looking ahead. We're not looking at all the sort of stages to get there, but it's really about what change do we want to see. And the way in which we're going to do that is thinking about formulating that change as a newspaper headline. So something that's very short, that's very catchy, and that really captures where you would like to be, what long-term change you would like to see in that particular program. So we've got 15 minutes for this. We'll start in the breakout groups with a very short introduction of each of the people in the breakout group and what your community-based program is. very briefly. Then we'll have a quick discussion about what sort of long-term change you want to see. And then we'll ask you to condense that long-term change into a newspaper headline. And what we'll do is we'll then bring all the newspaper headlines together back in plenary when we meet again. We'll have them on Mentimeter, and we can sort of have a look at those and see what they can bring in terms of our understanding of monitoring and evaluation. So I hope that's enough information at this stage. Obviously, each group will have a facilitator as well, so you'll be led through that process without any problems at all. And I think now Justine will maybe allocate breakout rooms.
Yeah, the breakout rooms are allocated, so I'll just open them. Just a small reminder to avoid making the change activity focus. Think of the results focused headline. And the rooms are open. Please go.
Super. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so I think we're all back. So I hope you didn't find that too challenging. And actually maybe even quite enjoyable, or at least quite, quite sort of thought-provoking. So what we're going to do now is, I think we're going back to Mentimeter for you to type out your newspaper headlines so that we can all see them. You don't have to put your names next to them at all, don't worry, so that we can just see the different kinds of headlines that have come up. So Justine has just put the link on the right-hand side on the chat. So if you could just follow that link and then type in your newspaper headline, then that would be brilliant.
I can share my screen, Juliette, to see the results.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Justine. And there are a few on the chat as well, I think, coming up. Nadia, the ones that you put on the chat, do you think you can add them to the Mentimeter? There are some very nice ones coming in, including one promoting a bit of ecotourism, maybe. Nice. Okay, so we've got some nice ones on, oh shoot, because it goes up, doesn't it? And then I can't see anything. Right, so there's a nice one, travel to the happiest haven of endangered snow leopards, so of course implying that it's become a place where snow leopards can live quite happily. Tetrali community welcoming migratory birds this year, so less shooting due to better understanding. So of course that's the outcome, is the fact that they're welcoming the birds rather than potentially shooting them. Government helps scale community insurance model across valley, herders rejoice. So there's a nice input here of the government helping, and the outcome with the herders being really happy about it. No retaliatory killing of snow leopards in the valley since the conflict mitigation program kicked in 4 years ago. So again, the output there being really the outcome there being no retaliatory killing. First Snow Leopards Festival in Tostes, a great success. Okay, so they're really emphasizing the fact that coexistence with the snow leopard has resulted in something that's led to a festival celebrating the snow leopards. Young Women in Spiti Valley sets up NGO to protect snow leopards. Brilliant. So really sort of that idea of putting together a group that then sort of goes up and sets up an NGO themselves. Local government supports local communities with their community-run livestock insurance scheme. So really important link there with the sort of strategic support from government that can lead to something very practical, like an insurance scheme. No loss of snow leopard during 5 years, the result of community patrolling. Again, really nice link there with the stop of retaliatory killing. Mongolia grasslands flourishing like it's the 1980s. So that's really lovely. So it's really a sort of, indication of some changes that have led to the restoration of a whole ecosystem. Local communities in Valley initiate an annual snow leopard festival to celebrate snow leopards for the first time ever. So again, the sort of long-term change there being that there's been all this sort of work leading to an appreciation or an awareness of snow leopard leading to this festival. Oh, these are absolutely brilliant. I love them. That's really cool. Thank you very much for all of that. Justine, do you want to go back on a few of them, just maybe with your sort of presentation in mind and picking up a few sort of key aspects?
Sure. So I think, maybe we're going to go into defining inputs, outputs, outcomes later. So you hear already Juliette drawing on that, which we'll hopefully go into that later. But I think what's nice is that many of these are results based. So they're not the actual activities in terms of what's taking place, which is really nice because we can then look towards that change or that result from our program or wider forces taking place. But no, they're really nice and really positive. I'm glad we have a session that makes things, it makes them, and maybe as what we discussed, a lot of these won't happen in a year, right?
Exactly.
They're going to happen 10 years or longer. But still, that's okay. That's what we're working towards, which is always great to keep in mind. Yeah, so then if we're ready to move on, Juliette, or do you have any last closing thoughts?
No, I don't. I haven't looked at the chat though, so I don't know if anything else has got back into that. No, all good. Yep.
If anyone has further questions, I think, one question that comes up is it hard to think about the results instead of just activities? I think we often automatically think about our activities of our programs and less about the actual results. So is that difficult in articulating clearly what we're hoping to reach towards and being very specific in our context? So I think, that's just something to think about and how we can help our brain move towards that is maybe something to think about.